Ready?
Spirit, please give your love out there to the Marybeth water and the Holy Spirit.
Hey, y'all. Marybeth's in the house. Yeah. Marybeth. Hey, y'all. Hi. So I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm super excited to do my testimony somewhere besides my center. You know, they're sick of it. So they've heard it all. I don't know which one I'll do. There's so many, you know, because I remember my first one was like this really long version of how I did dope and went to jail. And then the next, as you go on in the mission, you get the good stuff, right? You get the good stuff, right? So I'll just start out by saying that I'm Marybeth, and I'm a resident director with my wonderful husband, Corey, in Savannah, which kind of is a spoiler alert because this story ends really good. So my testimony starts bad, but it ends with that. So we're in Savannah, and so how I came to the mission, though, I will tell you this. So I grew up in church, whatever. It was Southern Baptist. It was like shame, shame, we know your name kind of deal, right? And my mom was like, look right, act right, get in the car, shut up, have fun, you know? And so that was what church was to me, right? And so I kind of just fell away from it or whatever and lived my life. When I got married, I was married 10 years. We didn't go to church, and I had a daughter. When she was 5, I found out he was cheating, and I divorced him and moved back in with my parents, right? So I'm like 33 at the time. And I drank quite often, I would say, at night. But I was a control freak. So as long as I started after 6 when she went to her room, finished before 10:30, which was like blackout time, then I wouldn't be hungover and I could function the next day and she wouldn't know, right? So that was cool, right? I didn't get any DUI. I never got caught on that one, so no one would say I was an alcoholic, right? So around that time, though, I was a single mom. I went back to hair school. I was like in hair school, and I was doing, I was like full-time everything, mom, student, worker, and I was drinking all the time and doing a lot of Adderall because it made me super mom, right? And then someone said like, oh, here's meth, smoke it, right? And then I was like, woo, I stayed up for like 3 days and I was the best at everything, you know? And that quickly didn't work, right? Because then it was time to like crash and it was 6 a.m. and my daughter's getting up for school and I have to go to the bus stop and go to school and I have a job. So that didn't really work, right? So I started like just kind of, you know, falling off, right? And then I was a month before I graduated hair school, I dated someone. And so this is tricky, even though you say you won't do things, right? Then if you're around it long enough, right, you will, right? So, because I thought it was disgusting. I had a sister I didn't talk to because she used to shoot up drugs. Well, he shot me up. And I knew in that moment my life was different. I remember my knees hitting the floor and I thought, this is different. I'm going to do this again, right? It was almost before I like went into shaking and feeling amazing. I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. But what it did, and what I'll say is that I always say that people do drugs for 2 reasons. One, to feel high, and you know, like people like to feel things. And some people do it not to feel anything. And I felt nothing. No more pain, no more nothing. I cared about no one, nothing, right? And I can even remember I did that for 4 years. I shot up. I began to lose everything, just slowly lost everything. So I'm a 5-time convicted felon with triple that in misdemeanors, right? In that 4 years, because I am like really bad at doing drugs. Like rule number 1, don't get caught. I couldn't stop getting caught. I don't even know what it was, right? I just kept getting caught. It was God, right? And so many times I went to jail and they released me with no charges because God was trying to get my attention, right? But I would lose everything, my house, my car, my this. And then finally, I was just desperate. And I don't know y'all's experience, but I was crying out to God, right? When I was alone or in my head, or one time I found myself walking in the middle of the country at night. I just didn't want to be where I was because it probably wasn't safe, right? And I was walking down this road And all of a sudden I realized I'm like a mile into the woods, country roads or whatever. And I got very scared. It was almost like the darkness, because it was completely dark, was closing in around me, and I could feel it, right? I could feel the evil. I could feel the desperation. It was crazy. And I began to just talk to God so I could get wherever I was going to end up alive. Like, that's how I felt, right? Like, it was like something out of a horror flick, because you know how crazy we get, and that stuff and that psychosis now. So I ended up crying out to God in jail. And it was like every event after was still terrible. I got high on the way home from jail, but every event after started leading me to something, right? So I get in the back of this taxi, high as a kite. It's like 3 a.m, and I'm like, take me home. This guy out of nowhere, this really nice guy, was like, hey, you can just stay in this room he was young, and he was like a trust fund baby. So he just had this place, and he did heroin, which wasn't my drug of choice. So I was like, okay. And we just did our own thing. And it was right by the mission. And so they wanted to go out and drink or whatever. They still had some normalcy in them. I was completely just on the needle. But I went out with them, and then I was like, oh, I'm over this. So I got a cab, and I told this guy, I began to tell him my testimony, right? I was in jail, and I felt like God said, you're going to speak to women. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm a junkie, right? And so I was telling him that, and he was like, ma'am, if God called you, why are you not doing it? And I was like, because I'm high. Like, you know what I mean? Because I'm on dope, dude. And it's 3 a.m. And so I don't know why I was telling this man all this stuff. And he said, well, I used to teach at this place called Savannah Mission Bible Training Center. Here's the number. Call this guy, right? So I was like, okay. So skip forward. I'm like, I'm going to call this place. So I began to tell my family, like, I'm going to rehab, right? I've never been to rehab. I got on drugs when I was like 35. But I was an alcoholic before that. But I got on drugs when I was 35, and at this point I'm 40. And so I was, I'm doing so good, right? They were over me at this point. And so they had my daughter, who stayed with me through all of this, lived with me, and finally, when I went to jail, she'd go to jail, and then she wakes up and you're not there. She was in 4th grade. She was like, I'm just going to stay at Nana's, right? And I was like, okay. So I was miserable. That was like 7 months before. I may have even ended up in jail again. But anyway, so I end up at this guy, and I call the mission. I'm like, call my parents, like, aren't you proud of me? And they kind of were. They kind of were excited I was going to go to the mission. So I get to the mission. They tell me to call back, okay, which I found I was like, what? You're not just ready right now? So I was like, okay, so I'll call you back Monday at 10, right? And so I told everybody I had an appointment Monday at 10, and I got in the car and went up there. So I showed up, right? And I could still hear this guy, Brian, in the office going, why's she here? I said, call, right? And I'm like, because I'm here, right? You're going to take me. So he agreed to let me come in, even though I had like warrants and some other stuff. He said, just get her in, right? So I get in the mission, and I was there like a week, right? And I was just like, this place is weird. I don't even know what's going on, right? Because I came to get off drugs. And so I walked in the office, and I sat down, and I said, where's my get off drugs class? Like, I was waiting for AA or the couches or counseling or something. I don't know what I was waiting for. Whatever's on TV, that's what I was waiting for. So I sit down, and they're like, pray about it, And at the time, if you knew me then, it was like, you pray about it, right? That's who I was. You pray about it. What do you mean? So anyway, I didn't understand. So about 4 days later, I get on a band. I get on a makeup band, and I get on a request band. So I'm 11 days in. I'm not allowed to write requests. I have to turn my back everywhere I go. I'm already humiliated to be there. I've never been around people like that. I've been alone. And I couldn't wear makeup. Now, right, I said I was in hair school. So I come in like this with fake eyelashes, right? And they were like, I had feathers in them, right? Like, they were in extreme. Glitter, everything. And I was just like, so they took the mask off, right? They took it off. I was devastated. I lasted about 10 more days. And then I was getting real bothered by people. So I said, okay, I wanted attention, obviously, right? That was the request. That was the makeup. That was the feathers. That was the boys. That was, all of it, right? So I put in a 24 because I wanted them to call me in the office and baby me, and I wanted some one-on-one, right? And they said, okay, thank you, we'll honor it. Your stuff's outside. No, yeah. And I was like, okay, honor it. So anyway, I left. So, and then I couldn't get a ride. So that young man that I had stayed with, drug dealer, Mo, with all gold teeth, showed up to pick me up at Savannah Mission Bible Training Center. Sorry. And showed up to pick me up, and I was just trying to catch a ride out of there. And then, the devil has a way. I turned on my phone. This is when you got stimulus checks, but I didn't know anything about them. And for some reason, I got one. So I walk outside the mission, turn on my phone, there's $1,400, right? So I go and, of course, buy drugs, right? So I get drugs, and they call my family and tell them I left, right? So it took about 12 hours, and my daughter was like on the phone crying, like, I was so proud of you. But in my mind, I had to get back to her because I was 21 days clean, right? I was ready. I was cool. So I was like, no, I'm fine, right? And she was like, no. So there she was being the adult. She's so great. And so I was like, so I lied to her and I said, it's okay because I've already called another one and I'm going back to that one's what I told her. And so I called them back and I said, can I come back? And they were like, no. But you can go to another one, right? And so they gave me numbers and I called Florida and they said, can you be here in 72 hours? And I said, yeah. I called my mom. I was like, I got a one-way ticket, right? So much happened in this as God, I can't even tell you, like the people on the plane and the weird stuff that went on and like all of these moments where I just know God was with me. But I went on my Cash App. I went to buy a one-way ticket. She's like, you can pay for the ticket. They were so over me. I have the best family in the world, and they were just done with me. And so I went online, and it was $180, and I had $180 in my Cash App. So I bought the one-way ticket, right? I bought the one-way ticket. I showed up in Florida with like 5 hoodies, a couple pairs of jeans, a half a pack of cigarettes, and an airport card with $5 on it, right? I just had $1,400 like 6 days ago, right? And they're like, well, you can just be a probie and all this stuff. So I was like, fine, whatever. So I sat down. I was not like fine, but I sat down and I sat in there and I was like, okay, God, I'm Baptist, right? So I know you. I know all the Sunday school stories. I've been to church, right? So let's just get to the middle school version of you, God, right? I got the kindergarten version. So I already know you, but what I didn't know, I didn't know God. I didn't know that God wanted a relationship with me. I thought God wanted me to come there and act right. He wanted me to show up, right? Cleaned up. He wanted me to get right. I thought if I could get right, I could go home and do hair and go to church. That was my plan. My whole plan. So I was going to get off. I was going to go home and I would go to church on Sunday and do hair. So as I'm sitting there, at first I was very rebellious to the program. I have to say, I don't know that anyone's come in quite like me that I've had to deal with. I'm sure it's coming. And I don't know why they put up with me, to be honest with you. Like when Gary said someone put up with you, like somebody literally put up with me. I threw chairs and did all this crazy stuff. I got on another makeup ban, right? They took my makeup again, and I was like, what is going on? And so I didn't have makeup for a year of my life, which was crazy, and I think it was the fake eyelashes again. I'm not real sure, but they took my makeup again, right? Because God wanted me to get to know Him, right? Just the way that I was. I'm trying to remember. There was so much that went on there. I don't think I got it till I wrote every night. I also came in with a mouse. So James 3, I think I wrote a tremendous amount because I would turn in a James 3 at 7:30 and then I would get walked. So at the time, my husband Corey was my senior counselor. And he used to walk me every night. I was just all the time. I can remember going 3 days, he didn't come out and call my name because I was one of those ones that just waited right in the spot where they call your name because I knew I got caught for something. I did something. Now I'm just waiting to see if I got caught, right? Every day. And it would be like 3 days and I would just be like, ooh, it can't go much longer than this, right? And so the next day I would get wrote up or whatever. But I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. I did. And I didn't care. Mary, I always get with her. We got in a fist fight during COVID. We did. She scratched my face, and she said something tonight. She said, "You didn't tell on me. They would have kicked me out if you had." And I didn't even realize that, but they probably would have, because I have scratches down my face. But they locked us in a room together for 14 days and said, "You have COVID. We like to kill each other." And yeah, it was tough. It was really tough. It was really hard. But yeah, so we did that. And then I would just I thought I was okay. So when you come in here, you have this self-righteousness. When you start to get better, you feel like everyone else should be better. So you're very self-righteous, right? But it's justified. You feel it's justified. Right? I'm doing better. Things are hard for me. You should do better. And that's crazy to me because it's crazy to me now. I think I went on for 3 years like that. People should get it, right? People should just get it. I remember telling my mom, that guy just doesn't get it. And she's like, some people never do. And it never occurred to me that there were going to be people in this world that just never got it, right? I thought everyone would get it. But anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that. But so I was on the mission. About 6 months in, I thought I'd surrendered. Oh, so that's a good story. So you start giving your heart to Christ, right? And I realized that everything I learned was complete crap, right? It didn't help me now, right? So I didn't know God like I thought I knew God. So I began to say, God, just teach me, because everyone's mean to me and no one likes me and I don't know why. Right? Because everyone was mean to me. Nobody liked me. No, I'm just kidding. It's true. But I wasn't likable, right? And I was annoying. Someone told me that. I was floored. Yeah. I remember I was like, this girl's annoying. And she was like, you're annoying. And I was like, I couldn't even stomach it. How could you talk to me like that, right? I was so annoying. I gave Walmart lists that were 2 solid pages like that. And I was demanding that, since you keep me locked here, these are my needs. Yeah. And it would be like tanning lotion and purple scrunchies and just random eyeliner, whatever, I always added something with makeup onto it, just in the hope they would miss it and get it or something. It was a mess, right? And but anyway, about 6 months. I remember really starting to realize that the Holy Spirit was teaching me, that I was reading the Bible and God was teaching me something, and that I wasn't here just to get off drugs. I was here to do something different. I was here to change, right? And I didn't understand why all these people wanted me to change in the beginning. Who are you? I'm just, I'm trying to do dope. And so all of a sudden, God was like, you need to change. And then he was like, I want this from you. I always heard he wanted my personality. Because I used to joke terrible, right? F words and inappropriate jokes, all the time. The shock value was my humor. And I was like, he wants my personality? That's weird. So I thought I was hearing things. But anyway, so he wanted my personality, but he also wanted my bitterness. I think I blamed my mom for a long time. I did all that. And then and then God just showed me her as an adult, doing the best that she could in life, without the information, she served God and she thought she was giving us God, all of her judgment and wrath and anger, self-righteous anger, right? But she wasn't. She was trying so hard to do what was right by us, but it wasn't what worked for me. So I began to just forgive. And then I will tell you this, I was sitting in the mission and it occurred to me in one of the scriptures, they were all brand new to me then, that if you don't forgive, you won't be forgiven, right? And I felt the fear. The fear hit me. I want to be forgiven. I ask every day, how prideful of me to think that, how quickly God is giving me that forgiveness each day, but I'm not offering it. So I remember going upstairs to our really hot room, okay, in Florida, no air conditioning. And this is right by Miami. I thought I was in Jacksonville the whole time, if y'all know anything about Florida. And then someone came in and was like, you're near Miami. So I was at the other end of Florida and didn't even know it for 2 months. Yeah, I thought I could go home. But anyway, so I was like, okay. So I went upstairs and I laid there and I just began to think of anybody and everybody and start forgiving them. And then I realized that it would not be, that there was no point in what I was doing. I should just go to the one I couldn't forgive I should just go to the hardest one, right? I should just go to the unforgivable things that were done to me and start forgiving them, right? And that's where I learned that forgiveness doesn't happen immediately, but the effort is rewarded immediately, right? The change is given. So I just laid there and forgave, just tears rolling down my face, and just forgiveness, you know. And my daily thoughts will go back to things that happened, and I'll feel the anger or resentment, but then I just have to remind myself I forgive them. And in the beginning, I wouldn't say my motives were great. They were because I wanted to be forgiven, But then I realized how I was practicing what everything that this is about, right? The whole purpose of Jesus's life to give us forgiveness, and how I just laid there in the mission practicing that one thing, right? The time I didn't get it quite what I was doing. But so about forgiveness. So, and then someone told me this, and I never realized this. This was the shocker. This was a game changer for me in the mission. Right about 6 months, that we don't forgive ourselves, right? I don't know if we do or don't, but we repent or whatever. But I felt like I needed to forgive myself, right? I don't know, just shame and guilt, period, right? But I realized that, I think I realized it, that hanging on to not forgiving yourself is like the most prideful thing you can do, because you're telling Jesus the cross was not enough. You forgave me before while I was still in sin and your enemy, but that's not enough for me, God. I decide when I'm forgiven. Wow. So then it occurred to me that if that was prideful, because, I always say men come in with pride in the front. Women, we kind of find that as a later thing, right? Pride's not our big thing, right? But how prideful I was thinking that I decide when I'm forgiven, right? And then I also realized that it wasn't just pride, but it was my excuse, right? I'm hanging on to my excuse. I'm not good enough or whatever. So when I go back, I can say, well, I kind of already knew I wasn't good enough. Well, that thing happened to me. If I forgive that person, right, and that no longer hurts me, then I no longer have an excuse to be who I want to be, right? But what Jesus did for us is enough, What he did was enough. And so on my makeup band, I had reached this point where I felt all of these wonderful, great little tidbits of things, right? These moments with God like that I understood there was pride in me, that I understood forgiveness, that I overcame forgiving people who don't deserve it, right? And I hope to see them in heaven, to this day. I hope upon hope. And I had reached this point, which we think is so good because it's so much better than where we were. And these people came and they were going to sing with these little light bars. Remember? Spirit and Truth. Is that who it was? Spirit and Truth came, and they turned out the lights, right? I don't think they do that anymore, but they sang in the dark, and it was like the best night ever, right? They came once a month when I was there, and they sang this song, and I go, what is it? I surrender. Okay, I can't sing, but I was in tears, right? Flowing down my face. And with my whole heart, y'all, with everything that's inside of me, I threw open my arms and I was singing, I surrender. And the makeup that I was sneaking around in my shirt fell out of me. It hit the ground and it rolled down the aisle. And I just thought, I'm such a liar to myself, right? I believed it. My heart was pouring out to my God, and my darkness fell out and rolled on the ground. I couldn't even surrender to the program, and it just hit me, right? It just hit me how we lie, like we're just fooling ourselves sometimes. Even I knew I was an idiot, even I could tell. And so God was just kind of like had jokes that day, and I was like, whoa. So then I knew I was getting to the end, right? And I didn't even understand that, I was fooling myself. So I knew I needed to stay. So I transferred to Savannah right there at the end. And again, I was ready to be an AC, right? In a kind of a self-righteous way. But I was ready to be an AC. Guess what God does? Guess what God does, right? But I had so far to go. So I just told God, I'm not going to leave, right? I'm just not going to leave until you make a way out. Not going to leave. And God just began to work on me there in so many ways, right? But again, I still had a little bit of the Southern Baptist God that condemned me my whole life. And so I kind of wanted a more relatable God. Do you know what I mean? So I remember telling God, I wish, you were more relatable at times when I read the Bible. And God was like, you want relatable? So he started speaking to me. I started reading the Bible, and there's really all these cool verses, like the one that says, mind your business. And first, right? I was reading that, and I was like, oh, God, you are kind of cool, live quiet and mind your own business. Right. And I was like, all right, that's pretty plain. That's to the point. It's not ye and they. Right. And then I read some other ones, and don't be easily offended. I didn't know that was in the Bible. It's a real thing. Do not be easily offended. If what your neighbor or anyone in this room says to you and it can offend you, you are not ready to go. Right. Just sit right down, because the world's got way worse out there for you. But we're to be unoffended. Right. We're to be unbothered. Right. I don't, who was it? Was it Mary? I said, nobody ever asked Jesus to do something. He said, I'll do it in a minute. I'm eating dinner. You know what I mean? Like you got to be unbothered, right? You got to be willing to serve. But anyway, so then I read Romans 6:21, and I'm going to read it to you because this is the game changer for me. This was like the verse if I had to stand on one. And I'll read it to you because this one is like a real God speaking directly to me. I didn't know this was in the Bible, right? Church my whole life, I had no idea any of the stuff was in the Bible. And it says, what benefit did you get from the things of which you're now ashamed? None. And I just sat there like a punch in the gut. What benefit did you get from the things of which you're now ashamed? And I could just feel the wasted life just sit on me right there. None, because the end of these things is death, right? And I stopped right there, and that verse rang true to me for a very long time, right? I would tell everybody in counseling, what benefit did you get from me? You know how we do. And none. There's no benefit, right? But so I stuck with that. And then one day I decided to read a little farther, right? And I went to 6:22, and this verse is amazing. So it says, but now that you've been set free from sin and become willing slaves to God, you have your benefit, right? I didn't even read that far. You have your benefit, resulting in sanctification and being set apart and made holy for God's purposes. And the outcome of this is eternal life, And I was just like, wow. But sanctification is so hard, right? I was stuck on salvation because that's what we do. And then sanctification was happening. And I was like, this isn't salvation. This isn't better, But why would Jesus, the whole thing that he did for us, he came to earth, he took on flesh and blood. I heard somebody say the other day, when they see when they see people with children who are cancer patients and they start to lose their hair, their parents will shave their heads, right, to do it with them. And that's kind of like what Jesus did when he saw that we were sick. He took on flesh and blood, and he came down to show us, right, the way, because he's a good father, and he came down to show us the way. I took on flesh and blood, and he suffered, right? And so, we're called to serve our Creator and our God who was willing to suffer for us, and yet we're looking for no suffering, right? And it's just not a reality, right? And that is why it says, count it all joy. That's why it says to join in God's suffering. When you go through suffering, right? To take joy in it, because you're getting to feel what your God felt. And so that's just amazing to me. That I had to learn that, though, because I was really looking for the good stuff, right? But then it says, lately, just recently here in my life, God gave me a husband, but I literally was sitting in the mission for 3 years, and I started to want a husband, right? I'd been divorced for 10 years at that time. But I started to want one. I wasn't afraid of being hurt anymore, right? Because when you fill up that one part of your life with Christ, you know that you can't be hurt that bad, right? So you're like, oh, okay, I want a husband. And I remember in February of the year we started dating, I looked at the mission and I said, my husband's not here. But I felt very strongly that God was calling me to stay at the mission, right? So I almost had this struggle where I had to choose to sacrifice what I want for what God's asking me to do, right? And I kind of was like, okay, I'll stay, right? But I kept looking. Okay, I'll stay, but I don't see a way. I went through that. And then I remember just this night where I said, no matter what, God, and it felt different this time. And I just laid there, exhausted with my own fight. And I said, no matter what, I'll stay right here and serve you, right? And it was totally different. And then a few weeks later, shortly thereafter, we had a banquet. And then that guy, something happened that night, and we just knew something was different. It was like, there he was. Well, we'd been in the mission for a long time together, and there he was. And I could feel the difference. It was like the Holy Spirit or whatever. And then a few days later, I love this part. This is my favorite part of the story. He was my boss. So I did the banquet, and he texted me like, oh, you did a good job, right? Hear a good job sometimes in the mission. And you're like, yeah, all right. You want people to notice things, because we're so prideful. But I was like, okay. He was like, you did a great job and everything worked out. And I was like, I'd put my heart and soul into it. And I was like, okay. I was like, thank you. And then the phone beeped again. And he said, and you look pretty, by the way. And I was like, what? I'm just kidding. I was like, oh my God, really? You think so? And yeah. And then 2 weeks later, we were dating.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
oh, do you want to do life with me? Is how he proposed. Yeah. So, and here we are doing life. But we both felt called to the mission, and we both felt called to do that. I didn't realize what was going to come with all that. We've had a go at the mission, and it's been wonderful because it's been hard. It's been great because we're better for it. We've just really recently gotten started doing some of the things that we can do together, and it's been wonderful. God gave me visions of love and being like a mother and caring for people, and we've been able to start doing that, and that's what I wanted, that's, I told God, whatever you want, and I've just been seeing, like, so lately in my life, there's been a couple bad diagnoses in my family. My daughter went through some stuff. Just situations, right? And if I were to look at these situations, if I were to look directly at what the doctor says, if I were to look directly at, the situation at hand or the problem that she has, or the money at the mission or the raw sewage in the yard, if I was to look at these things, I would have a hard time trusting God, right? But I can't see those things, because if you'll keep your eyes literally stayed on Jesus, and it's a physical practice. I've had to go to my room and pretend I'm looking at Jesus in my mind and just sit there, because if I take my eyes off, I'm going to sink. I'm going to be unhappy. I'm going to see what the world says is going on, and that's not what's going on. We serve a supernatural God who wants to provide for us for a reason. And even in sickness, I'm confident that it's the will of God. I'm confident that these things are going to come, And when I was worried about death and the people in my life, these bad diagnoses, he showed me that scripture. I was just sitting in the car I'm actually a phone Bible person. And I was just looking at it, and it said, sometimes God takes young people out to save them from the suffering that's ahead. Takes good people, not young, takes good people home early for the suffering. And I just thought, well, that's beautiful, right? And we have no control over it anyway. And I just want to, the more I crave being home with him, and the things of earth grow strangely dim, right? The more confident I am in all of these things and everyone's mortality. This isn't even the life we're supposed to be at. The value you place on this life is really, important that you really don't. But people cling to this life, cling to it. I want to stay alive. I want to do this. I want to live longer. I want to be better. I want to have a car. I want to have this, right? And there's no value in it. And so if we can keep our eyes on Jesus every day, every minute, every diagnosis, every phone call, every, $0 amount in our bank account, everything like that, if we can keep our eyes on Jesus, he'll just continue to give us exceedingly, more abundantly, like a better life. You know what I mean? God's just promises are real. And I'm walking, in that, and a lot of the promises now. So I always encourage people just to stay in the mission. There's 20 of them, um, just stay until God says go, right? He never told me to go, so I'm still here. But I had to fight to be here. I had to fight. One person said, Steve Jackson said, "This is my seat, and no one's going to get it." Remember him saying that in all of his devos? He would say, "I just decided this was my seat, and you can't have it," right? And so sometimes I took that on, like, okay, this is my seat, and I'm just going to keep it while I'm here. I'm not getting out of it. And so until God moves me, and I've just been blessed by the mission. It's crazy how God provides for the mission, how God supports all of this. We don't do anything, and He just continues to show up and continues to bless us and continues to run all these centers. I'm just amazed. I'm amazed at your center. I'm amazed at our center, and how God shows up. It's just a reminder, and I tell our mission, and I'll tell you guys that the bad news is that it's an 8 to 10 month program, and the wonderful news is you never have to leave. That's all I have.